The afternoon sun filtered through the tall windows of the Atlanta Historical Archive, casting soft gold across rows of aging boxes and brittle folders as Dr. Rebecca Morrison leaned over her desk. Among thousands of forgotten portraits, family albums, and formal gatherings donated by an anonymous estate, one image stopped her breath mid-draw. A wedding photograph dated 1903. At first glance, it was merely an old studio portrait. A white man in a pressed, three-piece suit seated stiffly beside a young black woman in an elaborate white gown. Their hands were clasped between them, arranged in what should have signaled unity, partnership, or love. Yet the moment Rebecca's trained eyes swept across the image, her instincts sharpened. Something in the scene felt wrong. Not strange, wrong. 15 years as a historical archivist had taught her to sense anomalies hidden within paper and ink. She knew the silent language of photographs, the subtle betrayals of posture, the quiet tensions in a subject's expression. And this photograph screamed violation from every direction. In 1903 Georgia, interracial marriage wasn't merely controversial. It was illegal, condemned under anti-miscegenation laws. First written in 1750 and strengthened again after the Civil War, simply standing together as equals. Before a land could have resulted in prison, yet here they sat, a white man openly posed beside a black woman, dressed not as a servant, but as a bride. Rebecca marked the photo for high-resolution scanning, unable to shake the uneasy pressure building in her chest. When she returned to it 2 weeks later, viewing the digital version on her monitor, she examined it piece by piece. The studio backdrop, the woman's gown, the man's rigid expression. Each detail raised more questions than answers. But nothing prepared her for what she found when she zoomed in on there. Clasped hands, her pulse stilled. The bride's fingers were not merely resting. They were shaped, intentionally, precisely, into a distress signal. Her thumb pressed to the side of her index finger in a way that silently begged, "Help me." Even at 300% magnification, the message was unmistakable. This young woman had used the only weapon available to her, subtlety, and had hidden her cry for rescue. Inside a pose meant to symbolize devotion, Rebecca's hands trembled as she zoomed closer. The signal wasn't accidental. It was deliberate, calculated. A message meant to survive even if she did. Not that this was no wedding dot, this was evidence. Shaking. She immediately called Dr. Marcus Williams, a specialist in African American history and Jim Crow documentation. When he arrived that evening, she placed the photograph before him without saying a word. Marcus's eyes narrowed as he studied the image, his expression shifting from confusion to dread. "This shouldn't exist," he murmured. "Because interracial marriage was illegal?" Rebecca asked, though she already sensed the real answer. Marcus shook his head slowly. "No, because this isn't a marriage at all. This is coerced, forced. Look at her face. That is not a bride's emotion. That is terror someone tried to hide." He pointed to the faint handwriting on the back of the photo, a single, chilling phrase. "Mr. Charles Whitfield and servant, not wife." Not bride.servant. The word struck the room like an executioner's blow. Rebecca stared at it, her stomach tightening. Then why the wedding dress? Why stage it like this? Marcus opened his laptop, searching records. His jaw clenched. Control. Humiliation. During this period, some white men staged fake marriage portraits with the black women they held in captivity. They couldn't legally marry them, but they could force them to pretend. The truth settled over them like poison. This wasn't a love story. It wasn't even a forbidden romance, that it was possession, documented in a photograph. That night, Rebecca barely slept. The woman's eyes followed her into every corner of her mind, the silent scream hidden in her fingers. Frozen across 120 years, begging anyone, to finally see her. Who was she? What had happened to her? Had anyone noticed her signal in 1903? Or had her plea vanished into history unheard? The next morning, driven by that haunting message, Rebecca and Marcus began their investigation at the Georgia State Archives. They opened the first box, following the name Charles Whitfield like a trail of smoke into fire. The truth, they would soon learn, was far darker than anything they expected, and the photograph was only the beginning. The Georgia State Archives smelled of aging paper and dust, the scent of forgotten truths. Rebecca and Marcus stepped into the records room with a sense of dread neither of them voiced. They were not just searching for names. They were digging into wounds that had never healed. When Rebecca told the archivist they were looking into the Whitfield family, the reaction was immediate and telling. Mrs. Dorothy Hayes, an elderly black archivist with 35 years of service, froze mid-movement. Her polite professional expression hardened into something older, something carved from history itself. Whitfield, she repeated slowly, as though tasting the bitterness of the word. That's the name my grandmother warned me about. Still carries weight in Atlanta, not the kind anyone should be proud of. Without waiting for further explanation, she disappeared into the back. Minutes later, she returned, pushing a trolley stacked with boxes. Old records, census documents, tax rolls, property listings. Files that should have been neutral now hummed with menace. Rebecca opened the first box. Her breath caught. The 1900 census entry for the Whitfield residence listed 10 servants. All of them black. All of them women and girls between 14 and 30. No men, no older women, no long-term staff one would expect in a wealthy southern household. Marcus scanned the page. This is a pattern, he said quietly. These weren't just workers. He selected them, controlled them. They searched deeper. Property deeds and factory records painted a picture of a man loved by the newspapers, praised as a progressive employer, tiller of the community, generous benefactor. But in every line of praise, they saw the truth hiding in the margins. Wealth built on the labor of vulnerable black women and children. Wages so low they might as well have been chains. Rebecca turned the page in the census book and found a young woman listed under Whitfield's household. Louisa, age 16, literate domestic servant. The first spark of recognition flickered in her mind. This must be her, she whispered. Maybe, Marcus said, though his tone suggested he already believed it too. They pulled newspapers from 1903, hoping for anything. Mostly society pages praising Whitfield's business ventures. A factory expansion. A charity donation. A speech at a civic banquet. His public reputation was immaculate, untouchable, exactly the sort of man the law would protect without question. But the real break came not from newspapers, but from something far more fragile, a thin folder labeled Missing Persons. 1,903. A box police had once dismissed, forgotten, and left to decay. Marcus opened it and went still. A small slip of paper, barely a paragraph long, recorded a report filed by Henry and Martha Johnson, Atlanta residents. Rebecca read aloud. Report, daughter Louisa Johnson, age 19, employed in the household of Charles Whitfield. Missing 1 month? Family not permitted to visit. Mr. Whitfield asserts she is well and fulfilling her duties. No evidence of wrongdoing. Case closed. Rebecca felt her body go cold. The date matched August 1903, the same month stamped on the photograph. Case closed? Marcus repeated, disgust lacing his voice. Just like that. No investigation. No follow-up. Because she was black, Rebecca whispered, and he was Whitfield. They kept digging. Through church archives, they found a letter from Louisa's mother, shaky handwriting filled with desperation. We have not seen our Louisa in 3 weeks. Mr. Whitfield will not allow us to visit her. He says it would disrupt the household. My heart tells me something is wrong. The reply from the pastor made Rebecca sick. I believe Mr. Whitfield. The family must not create trouble for a respected gentleman. Trouble. For a respected gentleman. That single phrase embodied the entire era. Rebecca's hands trembled. They tried to save her, she whispered. They knew something was wrong. And every door shut in their faces, Marcus said quietly. Every system that was supposed to protect them only protected him. 2 days later, they received a call from James Morrison, the great-grandson of the photographer whose studio name appeared on the wedding portrait. He confirmed he had preserved his ancestors' journals and invited them to his home. His study was a museum of frozen time. Wooden shelves lined with glass plate negatives, leather-bound notebooks, and early photographic equipment. James searched through a set of journals until he found one marked August 1903 with a faded ribbon. This, he said, placing it before them, is the entry your photograph came from? I never forgot it. He opened the journal. The handwriting inside was neat, but tight, as though the writer had been holding back emotion. August 17th, 1903. This was the most disturbing session of my career. Mr. Charles. Whitfield commissioned a wedding portrait. But there was no wedding. The words hit like gunshots. The young Negro woman he brought to the studio was terrified. The gown he forced her to wear did not fit. Her wrists were bruised. She did not speak a word. Rebecca's breath caught as James continued reading. While adjusting their hands for the pose, I noticed her fingers move, a small, deliberate pattern. A signal. She was begging me to see her. Rebecca's throat closed. I made sure to capture it clearly, James read. I fear it may be the only testimony she will ever leave behind. The room seemed to shrink around them. In that moment, the photograph stopped being an archive artifact. It became evidence of a crime committed in broad daylight, witnessed by a man who could do nothing to stop it. Marcus closed the journal gently. This confirms everything, he said. Whitfield didn't just force her into that picture. He staged the entire thing. A fake wedding. A fantasy of possession. Rebecca looked again at the photograph. The woman's eyes, the tremble in her posture, the message in her fingertips, and a single chilling question echoed through her mind. What happened to Louisa after that photograph was taken? Did she survive it? Or did Whitfield erase her from the world just as the systems of her time allowed? The hunt for the truth had only begun, but the shadows surrounding Louisa were growing darker, more suffocating, and more dangerous than either of them had imagined. The deeper Rebecca and Marcus dug, the more the city of Atlanta began to feel like a mausoleum of buried truth. Louisa Johnson was no longer just a girl in a photograph. She had become a ghost threaded through scattered records, half-erased reports, and small fragments of fear preserved in ink. Her life had been swallowed by the power of one man, and the silence around her disappearance was louder than any confession. They began by reconstructing her world, not the world Whitfield forced her into, but the one she came from. Through census rolls, church membership lists, and neighborhood directories, they found the Johnson family's address, a small but respectable home near Auburn Avenue, the heart of Atlanta's growing black middle class. The Johnsons were not poor. They were building something, a future, a community, a life carved out of determination in a city that often wanted them invisible. Henry Johnson had been a carpenter. Martha Johnson, a laundress known for her meticulous work. Their children were literate, enrolled in school, active in their church. They were survivors of Reconstruction, fighters in an era that punished ambition. And that made them vulnerable. When Henry was injured in a construction accident in early 1902, everything collapsed. With his income gone, the family spiraled into debt. They appealed for help from their church. A note in the charity ledger confirmed it. Family in need. Daughter Louisa seeking employment. That single line was the doorway Whitfield had been waiting for. Marcus rubbed his temples as he analyzed the pattern. This wasn't random. He targeted families during their weakest moment. Financial hardship, illness, desperation. That was his opportunity. Rebecca nodded. He offered them what looked like salvation. A job, a chance. And once she entered that house, she disappeared. But understanding how Whitfield captured Louisa was only the beginning. They needed to know what happened after Rebecca found the next clue in a dusty police ledger that hadn't been opened in decades. A marginal note caught her eye. Family attempted visitation. Servants instructed not to allow them entry. That detail chilled her. The servants themselves were likely terrified, trapped, and silenced. Whitfield controlled every voice in his home. No message in or out without his approval. Louisa's letters stopped, not because she chose to stop writing, but because Whitfield had cut off her only lifeline. Marcus, uncovered testimony from a community organization dedicated to documenting abuses against black workers, a rare attempt at alternative justice in a time when official institutions refused to acknowledge their suffering. The testimony came from a woman named Sarah, who had worked in Whitfield's home 2 years before Louisa. Her words, written in steady but shaking handwriting, painted a picture far darker than anything they had imagined. We were never allowed outside. He kept us upstairs. The doors were locked from the outside. The windows were nailed shut. If we tried to leave, he threatened our families. He could do anything he wanted to us. Rebecca felt sick reading it. This wasn't employment, she whispered. It was imprisonment. And then the most horrifying part of Sarah's account. There was another girl there when I arrived. Maybe 16 or 17. She stayed in a room on the 3rd floor. We weren't allowed to talk to her. She cried at night. After a few weeks, she disappeared. Whitfield said she stole from him and ran away. I didn't believe him. Rebecca's fingers tightened around the paper. That was Louisa's future if she hadn't resisted. He had done this before. Marcus traced Whitfield's name through judicial records and property documents. Time and time again, complaints were filed and dismissed. Missing daughters. Families begging for information. Requests for police intervention. Everything met the same response. No evidence. Case closed. Whitfield had friends in the courts. Donations to political campaigns. Frequent appearances at social clubs. He hosted dinners, funded charity events, and shook hands with influential men who owed him favors. His reputation was a fortress, built brick by brick out of public admiration and private terror. Rebecca leaned back, her eyes burning. The system didn't fail Louisa, she said. The system was designed to never see her. But the photograph changed everything. That it was the crack in the foundation. A piece of evidence Whitfield couldn't control. And because of that, Rebecca and Marcus were able to follow the faintest trail, a trail that led to the most critical question of all. Where did Louisa go after the day the photograph was taken? For a week, they sifted through church records, hospital logs, and hidden community archives. Finally, they found it. A note in the pastor's personal journal, written in quiet regret. Martha Johnson came to me again. She is certain her daughter is in danger. I cannot risk angering Mr. Whitfield. I pray she is mistaken. He prayed she was mistaken. Louisa's mother knew she wasn't. On their final afternoon at the archive, Mrs. Hayes approached them with something clutched in her hand, an old newspaper, clipping from 1903. The headline made Rebecca go numb. Prominent businessman, harassed by former servant's family, claims girl is unstable and unreliable. Whitfield had discredited the Johnsons before anyone could question him. That was the moment Rebecca understood the full scale of Whitfield's power and the weight Louisa carried when she formed that secret signal in the photograph. She had no police to call, no pastor to trust, no institution to protect her. Her only weapon was a gesture small enough to hide, but brave enough to endure a century, and it was now, leading them into the next stage of their search, the stage where Louisa would finally step out of the shadows of Whitfield's house and into the light of her own story. For days, Rebecca and Marcus felt as though they were walking through the slow descent of someone else's nightmare. Every record they uncovered, every faded letter, every scrap of testimony pointed toward a single truth. What had been done to Louisa Johnson was not an isolated crime, but part of a pattern so meticulously hidden and socially protected that it survived history untouched. But now the investigation reached a turning point, the moment when cold documents became living. Testimony that it happened the morning James Morrison, great-grandson of the photographer whose stamp appeared on Louisa's photograph, called them back to his home. His voice on the phone held a weight that made Rebecca's skin prickle. I found something else, he said. Something I didn't realize connected until I reread my great-grandfather's notes. His house in Decatur smelled of old paper and pine polish. James guided them past shelves of glass, negatives, tintypes, ledgers, and preserved photographs, a vast family archive that chronicled decades of Atlanta history. But one narrow drawer in the corner of the study was locked. When James opened it, Rebecca saw the contents were something he kept separate, on purpose. Personal journals. His great-grandfather, William Morrison, had kept them between 1889 and 1910. A private account of every shoot that weighed on his conscience. James pulled out a leather-bound journal. Its spine cracked with age and set it on the table with reverence. "This entry," he said quietly, "has haunted my family for generations." The page was dated August 17th, 1903. Rebecca leaned forward as James began to read aloud. "Today I was asked to photograph a wedding that was not a wedding. Mr. Charles Whitfield brought a young Negro woman to my studio, dressed in a fine white gown." Her eyes were wide with terror. Rebecca felt her stomach twist. It was one thing to see fear captured in a photograph. It was another to hear a witness describe it in real time. The woman was trembling so fiercely, I struggled to pose her. I saw bruises on her arms, dark and fresh. "Whitfield corrected me when I called her Miss. She's not a miss," he said. "She is my girl." Marcus closed his eyes. There it is. The language of ownership. James continued. He forced her to sit beside him. He took her hand roughly. I saw her flinch. But then something happened. Her fingers moved. Not randomly. With purpose. Rebecca felt chills crawl up her spine. She knew exactly what was coming. I recognized the shape of her hand from an illustrated pamphlet on emergency signals I had once seen during my time assisting a medical photographer. She was asking for help. In that moment, she used the only message she could. James's voice cracked as he read. Her eyes met mine. They pleaded. They begged. For a heartbeat, I nearly spoke out. Nearly defied Whitfield. But the world we live in does not allow justice for girls like her. I am ashamed to say I stayed silent. The sentence hung in the air like a confession to a century of unspoken crimes. James turned the page. I adjusted the camera. I captured the image exactly as she intended. Hand fully visible, signal clear. I took 3 exposures so the message could not be lost. After they left, I locked the negatives away. I could not destroy them. They are evidence of something monstrous. Rebecca's throat tightened. He tried to save her, in the only way he could. Marcus nodded. He preserved the truth even when the world refused to hear it. But the journal entry wasn't finished. I fear for the girl. Whitfield is dangerous. She will not survive in his home. If anyone finds these notes someday, I pray they bring justice where I could not. A long silence followed. For the first time, the investigation did not feel like academic research. It felt like inheriting a burden handed from one generation to another, a torch that had been waiting 120 years to be carried forward. What happened to the other exposures? Rebecca asked. James gestured toward a wooden box on the shelf. He unlocked it and carefully lifted out 3 glass plate negatives, wrapped in tissue paper. He placed one against the light. Rebecca gasped, the signal in Louisa's hand, her thumb curling inward. Her index finger folded just enough was perfectly visible. The clarity was shocking. There was no ambiguity. No doubt. This was a coded scream. A woman fighting for her life in a world where she had no voice. Marcus whispered. She knew exactly what she was doing. Rebecca nodded. She had to leave a message in a place where Whitfield couldn't erase it. The photograph had survived because Whitfield believed he owned it, just as he believed he owned her. But the camera captured a truth he could not bury. The room felt charged, as though Louisa's presence lingered in the air between them. Urging them onward, Rebecca touched the edge of the glass plate, careful not to smudge it. She was brave, she whispered. Braver than anyone around her realized. And a deeper truth was beginning to form. If Louisa had the courage to signal for help in a moment where her life hung in balance, then maybe, just maybe, she left other clues behind. Other fragments of resistance waiting to be uncovered. The photograph was not the end of her story. It was the opening. a doorway into the darkest months of her life. And the first glimmer of the escape she would one day risk everything to make dot as they closed the journal. A new determination settled in Rebecca's chest. They had seen Louisa's silent scream. Now they would follow it wherever it led, even into the shadows Whitfield spent his life trying to hide. With the photographer's journal in hand, Rebecca and Marcus now possessed not just suspicion, but proof of coercion, proof of violence, proof that Louisa had tried to speak through the only language available to her. But the journal also opened a door they had not anticipated. If William Morrison had documented Louisa, how many others had slipped through history unrecorded? Their next step was to map the pattern. The darkness surrounding Whitfield did not begin or end with Louisa. His crimes stretched backward like roots from a poisonous tree. Twisting through years of silence and stolen lives, they began at the Atlanta Municipal Archives, requesting access to complaints filed against household employers between 1895 and 1905. What they found was a graveyard of dismissed pleas, dozens of cases written in shaking handwriting, each bearing the same tone of fear. Daughters missing, visits denied, letters stopped, jobs that were supposed to feed families turning into disappearances. The first file Rebecca opened was dated 1899. A father had tried reporting his 17-year-old daughter missing after she stopped writing home. The police had marked his complaint with a single word, unfounded. The second file, from 1901, was worse. A mother wrote that her daughter had returned home broken, refusing to speak, refusing to sleep alone. She had worked only 3 months in the Whitfield home. Again, case dismissed. By the time they reached 1905, there were 6 cases that directly mentioned Whitfield's name, all dismissed. Marcus' voice grew heavy. These are only the families brave enough to report. Imagine how many didn't. Imagine how many couldn't. Rebecca swallowed hard. This wasn't just exploitation. This was a hunting ground. She traced her fingers down one case file, a 14-year-old girl named Esther. She had been hired as a housemaid. Her family received 3 cheerful letters within a month. Then nothing. When they visited the Whitfield estate, the butler turned them away. They filed a complaint, but weeks later, a note in the margin revealed the chilling truth. Family advised to drop matter. Mr. Whitfield's word is final. Rebecca whispered, 14, and shut the folder with trembling hands. Marcus kept reading. He had absolute immunity. It wasn't an exaggeration. Whitfield donated to police charities. He hosted dinners for judges. His business supplied textiles to powerful merchants. The newspapers praised him. Clergy blessed him. Society bowed to him. Every institution that could have shielded Louisa instead protected her captor, but there was more dot at the back of the archive. In a poorly organized box labeled Community Reports Negro, Marcus found what the city had never: intended to preserve witness accounts collected secretly by black community organizers who knew the law would not help them. One report had a statement signed only Sarah. They recognized her handwriting at once, the same woman whose testimony they had seen earlier. This version was longer, raw, unfiltered. Whitfield had a room on the 3rd floor where he kept the girl he liked best. She never left except when he wanted her to. If she cried, the rest of us heard it. None of us were allowed to speak to her. One morning I saw her being dragged down the stairs. Her lip was bleeding. She was begging him not to hurt her. He told her she belonged to him. Rebecca closed her eyes, forcing back tears. Another statement came from a worker at the Whitfield textile factory. Mr. Whitfield brought a girl into work one day with bruises on her neck. She said she fell, but I saw fear in her eyes. We all knew what happened in that house. Nobody said anything because white men did whatever they wanted. If we spoke, we would lose our jobs or our lives. Marcus looked at Rebecca. This confirms it. The whole community knew, but they were powerless. The darkest testimony came from a minister who had attempted to intervene on behalf of a young woman employed by Whitfield in 1900. He invited me to his home for a conversation. He poured me a drink. His tone was polite, but his message was clear. He said, "Reverend, you are a good man. But if you keep asking questions about my servants, I will ruin your church, and I will make sure your people pay the price." I never went back. Silence fell over the room. Every piece of testimony pointed to a truth more horrifying than anything the police had ever acknowledged. Whitfield was allowed to operate as a private tyrant inside his home. He used his influence to prey on vulnerable black women, and the city protected him because his victims had no legal personhood. But amidst this ocean of despair, they finally uncovered a trail, a thread that separated Louisa's fate from the others in a fragile church archive from 1903. Marcus found letters from Martha Johnson, Louisa's mother, dozens of them, all pleading for help. Her handwriting deteriorated as the weeks passed. "It has been a month since we have seen her. Whitfield will not allow us to visit. My daughter has never been away from me this long. She always writes. Why has she not written? Someone must help us." Rebecca read each letter with a growing ache in her chest, but the most devastating letter, the one that sealed the Johnson family's helplessness, came in October 1903. 3 months after the photograph was taken, I stood outside his gate today. A servant told me, without looking me in the eye, that my Louisa is busy and cannot come. "Reverend, I know my child. I know she is suffering. Please, I beg you, find someone who will listen." No one did, not the pastor, not the police, not the courts, not the newspapers, not Atlanta's white citizens. The next entry in the pastor's journal confirmed the horrifying truth. "Mr. Whitfield assures me she is well. He believes the family is ungrateful. I have chosen not to pursue this further." The weight of that choice, a choice repeated countless times by those in power, had buried Louisa alive. Rebecca whispered, "He never intended for her to leave that house." Marcus nodded grimly. "But she did. Somehow she survived, and we're getting close to finding out how." The records ended in December 1903, the last time anyone in Atlanta claimed to have seen Louisa or heard her voice. But when Rebecca reviewed the faded photograph again, zooming in on that trembling hand, forming the signal, she realized something she had missed before. The gesture wasn't only a cry for help. It was a promise that she would fight, a promise that she would endure, a promise that she would leave behind evidence, no matter the cost, and somewhere beyond the walls of Whitfield's house. Louisa had done exactly that. The next stage of their investigation would take them beyond Atlanta, into the trail of an escape so dangerous it could only have been attempted by someone with nothing left to lose. The winter of 1903 settled over Atlanta like a shroud, cold, heavy, and suffocating. While the city decorated itself for the holidays, a darkness hung over the Whitfield estate. Louisa had not been seen publicly in months. Her family's pleas had been silenced. The pastor had withdrawn, and the authorities had already erased her from their conscience. But inside that grand house on Peachtree Street, the truth was unraveling. Rebecca and Marcus now knew what the archives had tried to hide. The testimonies, the missing girls, the repeated patterns, everything pointed to one chilling reality. Louisa was not supposed to survive. Whitfield had tightened control. Servants were replaced. Locks were changed. Windows boarded. Visitors discouraged. The estate had become a fortress, the kind built not to keep danger out, but to keep truth in. But something Whitfield had not anticipated was happening. Upstairs, in the back bedroom of the third floor, Louisa was planning an escape. She had soaked in every detail of his routine. The hours he left home, the servants he trusted, the paths through the house that creaked and the ones that didn't. Captivity had sharpened her awareness, not dulled it. Every night she whispered to herself, "I will not die here." But she needed a chance, and that chance came from someone unexpected. A maid named Naomi, roughly her age, newly hired, terrified of Whitfield, but quietly observant. She had overheard Louisa crying, had seen her bruises, had caught glimpses of her swollen wrists and trembling hands. Unlike the others, Naomi's fear did not stop her compassion. One night, when Whitfield was away at a business dinner, Naomi carried a tray of food upstairs. She paused outside Louisa's door, looked around nervously, and whispered, "I can help you. But you must trust me." Louisa's breath shook. It was the first act of kindness she had received in months. Naomi had overheard rumors that Whitfield was planning to replace Louisa, that he had grown unstable, that something violent was coming. And one sentence Naomi whispered changed everything. He said he would not let you see another spring. That was the moment Louisa understood. If she didn't escape now, she never would. For the next week, Naomi mapped a route through the house. A back stairwell rarely used. A hall that servants avoided at night because the lights flickered. A pantry door that led to a side exit. On a cold February night in 1904, Louisa made her move, barefoot, trembling, wrapped in a stolen shawl. She slipped out of her room while Naomi created a distraction in the kitchen, dropping pots, screaming about rats, drawing the butler away. Louisa reached the back stairwell. She descended silently, heart pounding with each step. Just as she crossed the pantry, a floorboard creaked. The butler's voice echoed down the hall. "Who's there?" Louisa froze, every muscle in her body turning to ice. Naomi shouted in, pulling the butler away. "I saw something. Come quick, please." The door was only 20 steps away. 10, 5. When she burst into the night, she didn't breathe. She ran. She ran through the yard, through the trees, through the dark streets of Atlanta, her bare feet tearing on gravel. She didn't dare look back. She didn't dare slow down. She didn't dare think about what would happen if he caught her by dawn. She had collapsed near the train station, starving, injured, lungs burning. Members of a black mutual aid society found her trembling on the ground, unable to speak, barely conscious. They carried her to a safe house, then transported her north, then finally to the Freedmen's Hospital in Washington. D.C., Rebecca and Marcus stared at the hospital entry now in their hands. Patient, Louisa. Multiple injuries. Extreme trauma. Refuses to give surname. States only. "He will kill my family if I tell," Rebecca whispered. She survived. But she never went home. Marcus nodded. Because going home meant death for her. And for her family. The doctors did not know her full story. The social workers knew fragments. But one detail in the hospital notes struck Rebecca deeply. Patient repeatedly mentions a photograph. States she left a message inside it. Louisa had escaped with her life, but not with her truth. That truth now belonged to the photograph. The one that traveled through time. The one that carried her silent scream across 120 years. And now, Rebecca and Marcus were holding it. Louisa had survived Whitfield, but Whitfield had not accepted defeat. Exactly. 1 month after Louisa's escape. The newspapers reported a suspicious fire in his home and the death of a servant girl. The police called it an accident, but the black newspaper had hinted at the real story. Whitfield had burned a room to hide the fact that she had escaped. He needed the city to believe she was dead. He needed to erase her existence. He needed to bury the evidence of what he had done. The photograph was the evidence. He failed to destroy, but the story was far from over. Rebecca exhaled shakily. "We know how she escaped, but we still don't know what happened after. How did she live? Did she ever reunite with her family? Who protected her? Who carried her story forward?" Marcus looked at the hospital file again. "There's another name in the records," he said. "A social worker named Catherine Wells." Rebecca's eyes narrowed. Let's find where her papers ended up. The next chapter of Louisa's story was waiting. And it was about to change everything they thought they knew.